everyone, and welcome to this webinar series focusing on blended learning. As you know, this webinar series consists of 2 webinars and some asynchronous activities. After the first webinar with Michael McNamara, today we are very glad to welcome Damien Lonergan, who's a post-primary teacher who teaches French, German, and ICT in Ireland. He's a PhD candidate in the University of Limerick, and his research concerns the use of technology to facilitate critical reflection amongst pre-service teachers. He is an Irish eTwinning ambassador who has facilitated different workshops nationally and at European level in relation to using technology for teaching, learning, and assessment. Dear Damien, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. A big welcome to everybody, and thank you very much for having me. So today what we're doing is that we're going to be looking at blended learning in practice. So you should be able to see my screen there. Just to comment really on the just seeing the comments there. You know, there's so many people from so many different countries, so it's great to see. So we're just going to get going with this now. The general purposes for the webinar series, just a reminder of those. So we're going to be clarifying what blended learning entails, and we're going to inform, we're going to inform participants about the models of blended learning, and we're going to focus on current and relevant approaches. And also what we're going to do is we're going to explore what blended learning looks like from the classroom and teacher perspective, which I think is very important. We're going to provide participants with opportunities to try out blended learning in their classroom and to reflect on their experiences. I think it's very important as well to be cognizant of how eTwinning can be used while engaging in blended learning. I think is very important as well. And also what we're going to do is that we're going to highlight the key resources for participants and for the resources that participants can access, and so in order to develop their knowledge of blended learning and aid them with the blended learning process. Okay, so these are our intentions today. All right, for our learning webinar, for our webinar 2. So we're going to highlight what was learned in the previous webinar in relation to key resources participants can access to develop their knowledge of blended learning. And we're going to be cognizant of, because I think, you know, when we're dealing with blended learning, I think it's also important to be cognizant of the digital divide when planning a blended learning approach, because I think once we plan that and once we are fully aware of it, I think this is how we can plan it. You know, I think this is how, you know, we can plan effectively when we are cognizant of the digital divide. So we're going to explore what blended learning looks like from a teacher and classroom perspective, like I said there, and we're going to discuss different blended. I mean, you touched on it before in webinar 1 with Michael, but in this webinar, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be discussing the rotation station and enriched virtual model for blended learning. Okay, and also we are going to understand Selfie if you haven't heard of it. So we're going to understand Selfie in terms of a whole school approach to planning for blended learning. Okay. So just a little bit about me, as was said there before. I'm a French and German teacher. I'm an eTwinning ambassador, and you know I've facilitated various courses in relation to using ICT for teaching, learning and assessment. And also my PhD research, as was said again, is in relation to using technology to facilitate critical reflection. Okay, so the next bit here. So I think it's always important to revisit the prior learning. All right, so as you can see here, all right, you know, in relation to revisiting prior learning, it's important because it influences knowledge acquisition and higher order skills, you know. So we're going to revisit the prior learning in relation to webinar 1. All right. So what I want you to do is I want you to go to the Menti. All right. That's there on the screen. And I want you to mention any ideas, keywords, information you've learned from webinar 1. All right. Also, if you find it easier, you can also mention it in the chat. all right, if you prefer. So if you want to go to the Menti, you can go to the Menti, all right, or if you wanted to just mention the ideas in the chat here in relation to you know, what you've learned, or if you can remember any of the ideas, keywords, or information that you've learned from webinar 1, if you want to mention that there. All right, so I'll give you 5 minutes to look at that exercise. So the Menti Menti link is in the chat there. All right. So again, for those who've just joined us there, so we're just revisiting the prior learning of webinar 1. Okay, so what you can do if you would like is you can click on the link there, and you can mention any ideas or keywords or information that you've learned for webinar 1. You can do that on the Menti that we've just sent there. Or what you can do is you can include it in the chat there if you so wish. So it's great to see that there's ideas coming through there. So, you know, people remembered models of blended learning, you know, flex model, great. There's some fantastic stuff coming through here. Own learning, fantastic, a variety of resources. What blended learning is, brilliant. Excellent. The flip class, fantastic. Great. So we have that coming in the Menti. So we have some coming in the chat here. So we've got the blended learning matrix, models of blended learning, fantastic. Great, there's some great stuff coming in here. So new resources, brilliant. Easy learning, PDSC toolkit, which is great. Brilliant. Okay. PDSC, a lot of PDSC getting some fantastic mentions here of the resources that they provide. Brilliant. Two-way communication. Brilliant. Some fantastic stuff coming in here. Individual learning, what is blended learning? Asynchronous activities, brilliant. Wow, there's some great stuff coming in here. Fantastic. So let's have a look at the chat there again. So models of blended learning, flex models. Great. Station model, enriched virtual model gets mentioned there. Brilliant. Okay. So we just have 1 more minute there. Fantastic. Some great stuff coming in there. Blended teaching matrix is there. Digital tools. Mentioning some of the applications that are used. Brilliant. Okay, so we're going to move on from that there, which is great. Some great stuff coming in there, which is fantastic to see. So what we're going to do, all right, is we're going to go on. So we're sharing our findings there, which is what we have done just there. And I think it really shows, you know, I think it really shows, you know, what has been learned. And I think it really shows that it has been quite an effective, you know, task to revisit the learning, which is absolutely phenomenal to see, you know. So what I'm going to do is that I'm just going to get the responses up here in relation to the learning. So I'm just going to stop my screen share there, and I'm just going to quickly share the findings. So as you can see here, all right, this is what people have found from the Mentimeter thus far, which is fantastic. So these are the findings that we have from this exercise there now. Okay, so I just wanted to share that with you. So what we're going to do, I'm just going to stop sharing my screen there. I'm just going to go back to our presentation. You should be able to see my screen there again. So reminders from webinar 1. So examples of what we have covered. All right, so we've covered some things, in relation to the definition of blended learning. We've looked at different models of blended learning. We've looked at, key considerations when planning for blended learning, which I think is very important. And I think a lot of the time between the chat and the Mentimeter, the PTSD supports for blended learning were mentioned, and these include the PTSD toolkit. Okay, and some of the stuff on the PTSD toolkit includes, how to source reliable information online, and it shows how to create instructional videos, videos in relation to online conferencing, screencasting, and assignments and feedback. Some great supports there. Okay, so now one of the things that I really wanted to talk about, in relation to when planning for blended learning, I think this is a conversation that, it is important to have. It's in relation to the digital divide. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I will be playing you a video that illustrates the digital divide, an example of it. And I've given you a clip there so that you can watch in your own time as well. But in relation to the digital divide, I think that, it is something that has, and I think it continues to impact schools, school communities. And I think during this pandemic, the digital divide has drawn further attention to the need for school communities to have proper access to internet devices, and basically to minimize disruptions to teaching, learning, and assessment. So what I want to do is that I want to show you a video in relation to what one school community is doing in order to address the digital divide. Okay, so I'm just going to unshare my screen there, and then I am going to let you watch a YouTube clip there. Okay, and by all means, if you are having issues with listening to the sound, please let me know. So just 1 second there now.
Classes for at least part of the academic year in light of the coronavirus pandemic. But how do students access digital lessons if they don't have a stable internet connection at home?
I've had tons of stories told about parents who are pulling up in the parking lots of their neighborhood schools to tap into their Wi-Fi, or sitting out in McDonald's trying to get access by sitting at a local table. In some communities, kids have done it so much that they've changed the hours and the policies for those kids to actually sit there. So that's what the experience looks like when you're not connected.
Turner Lee has spent years studying what's been called the digital divide, or the gap between those who have consistent access to technology and connectivity and those who don't. Roughly 11% of Americans don't have a computer at home, and nearly 20% don't have a broadband internet connection, according to the most recently available census data. Rural and low-income students can be the most affected. A 2020 Michigan State study found young people living in the state's more remote areas who don't have internet or can only access it using a cell phone have lower GPAs than their connected peers. They are also less likely to attend higher education. Those researchers found that the gap could cause ripple effects that can impact kids' whole lives. Schools nationwide are getting creative in an attempt to bridge that gap. Many are offering packet pickups of paper lessons for students to do at home. Districts in South Carolina and Florida have turned parked school buses into Wi-Fi hotspots. Any student within a certain radius of the vehicle can connect to its internet. Students in one Alabama district can register to get a personal hotspot, and public TV stations in Ohio are now airing at-home learning programs throughout the day. The recently passed $2 trillion federal stimulus package could help districts boost those efforts. $13.5 billion in total funding was earmarked to help K-12 schools navigate the pandemic as a whole, though it didn't provide dedicated funding for an existing Federal Communications Commission program that helps schools expand their internet access. But that could change in the next stimulus package. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has indicated she'd like to focus on strengthening the country's infrastructure, including digital infrastructure. Amy Morona, Newsy, Washington.
Okay, so there's that. So I'm just going to share my screen again with my presentation. Okay, So that was what one school community was doing in order to address the digital divide. So I want you to answer the following in the chat after looking at that video and also reflecting on your own experiences. Is there a digital divide in your school community? If the answer is yes, how is your school community addressing it in order to minimize disruptions to teaching and learning? And if the answer is no, how is your school community using digital technologies to maintain teaching and learning? I think this is important because, you know, from this and from these conversations, we can learn, as educators, we can learn a lot from each other. Okay, so if you just want to answer that in the chat. So that question there. So is there a digital divide in your school? If the answer is yes, how is your school community addressing it in order to minimize disruptions to teaching and learning? If the answer is no, how is your school community using digital technologies to maintain teaching and learning? So if you can answer that in the chat, please. I'll give you a couple of minutes for that. Okay, yes, there is. Okay, Natasha, and then how is your community dealing with that in order to minimize disruptions to teaching and learning? So we have some fantastic answers here. So tablets were given to some children, some of them work from school. Okay, yes, school has provided computers. Okay, no, there's not. All right. Okay. Okay, so if there is a digital divide, how is it being addressed? We're getting some fantastic answers here. So government has made funds available to purchase devices, fantastic. Okay, so some great ones. Okay, so there's a public platform that students use to watch videos about the lesson there. Okay. Okay. Even computers. Okay, great. Right. Okay. So we try and communicate in different ways. Classroom to home. All right. So in Turkey, they have the EBA platform. Oh, very interesting. Computers to the students. Okay. 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 Great. Some great answers there. Some have smart boards and a Wi-Fi connection. Some schools have smart boards and a Wi-Fi connection. Okay. Okay, very good. Okay, some fantastic answers there. I think it's very beneficial for everybody to learn from those. And it's very interesting to see, you know, the EBA platform that's been mentioned here. I must look into that a bit more. And some professional development courses. Fantastic. Okay, so you know, here in Ireland, we have the professional development services for teachers, and one of the many fantastic supports that they have is the good practice videos. And good practice videos are I think are so beneficial because, you know, they're coming from different scenarios, and, you know, because as we know, no two schools are the same. So it's great to see the different, you know, it's great to see the different videos in relation to how teachers use technology for teaching, learning and assessment. So these are the PDSD good practice videos. Okay, so what I want to do is that I want to show you those. So I want to show you those now. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to share my screen there again, and I'm just going to show you these here. All right, so these are the good practice videos. So we have stuff in Gaeilge, all right, which is Irish. And as you can see here, we have some in English as well. So these are some examples. So you saw the instructional videos using the whiteboard, which was quite useful. But you know, there's one of the things I really like, one of the many things I really like about this is that they have one specific to primary education, post-primary education. They have ones in relation to internet safety, and they also have ones, you know, in relation to COVID-19. I just think there's so many, you know, videos to suit different types of school communities. I think they're so very useful. And I think, you know, no matter what type of school community you're in, you could, you know, gain something from them. All right. So this is one of my favorite ones here. I'll just make sure that my sound is on. So to show it, so I'm just going to show it here now.
So every class is fully immersed in technology. I wanted to design a lesson that engaged the students and engaged them on what their interests were in the classroom and remotely at home. So the learning objective of this lesson is to get students representing, understanding and creating 2D and 3D images. We used Minecraft Education Edition to engage the students at the start. This allowed them to enter into a virtual world. I'd asked 2 students to be leaders. So this side of the class entered one world and this side entered another world, and they worked as a group together, creating the competition of who could complete the task first. They worked together, building these blocks together, talking to each other, getting collaboration, engaging the students, and then creating a 2D. So that when the normal class started, the students had already engaged with this drawing. They had already worked as a team in completing this task, and their interest in achieving on the paper was improved due to they had already created it virtually. The next step then is the flipped learning class. I created a PowerPoint presentation on how the graphics question will be attempted. So sampling a perfect answer question. The students are able to slow down and get step-by-step instructions at their pace, at their level, but also the students that might want to push on can quickly skip through the easy parts that they understood and were able to do and focus on the more challenging aspects. I myself in the classroom have my visualizer on, have my projector on, so I'm drawing with the students, taking questions with the students and keeping that dialogue that was created through Minecraft going. While the students are drawing, they're taking photographs with their iPads of what they felt were interesting, difficult or challenging of that drawing, and they're uploading that onto their keynote presentation. Through this presentation, the students are being reflective, they're uploading imagery, and everything here that they are uploading is available now for peer assessment and also the teachers to assess. For at the end of the presentation, we finish off with a few keywords, improving on the students' terminology, again, increasing their opportunity to speak and use actual verbally worded answers in class. And now the teacher can engage with the students' work. So not just getting an image of their final answer, but the teacher is able to look at their learning journey throughout that drawing. So it's a very powerful resource to have, and the teachers can then formulate feedback individually suited to that student's needs.
Okay, so that's just an example of one of the many good practice videos that we have, that the PDST have, and they're updated regularly as well, which is fantastic. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to share my screen there back in my presentation. All right. Let me see there. Okay, so you should have my presentation back up there. So what we are going to do is we're just going to continue on with this now. So like I said, so good practice videos are a great way to view examples of how digital technologies are used to enhance teaching, learning, and assessment practices in different educational settings and for different subjects too. So not only is it, you know, either primary or post-primary, or not only are there only videos for you know, COVID-19 or internet safety or whatever, you know, there's a different range of subjects. So, you know, you're bound to find something that suits you. and that you would benefit from, which I think is, you know, absolutely phenomenal. All right. So, and the link is there in relation to it. All right. I think moving on, I think, you know, it is always important to think about, you know, again, like I said before, and like we explained before, you know, no two school communities are the same. So I think it is important, you know, to explore possibly using mobile technologies. You know, obviously, if you are exploring any of, you know, if you are exploring, you know, the use of mobile technologies, it is important, you know, to speak with, you know, management in your school, and, you know, the people that are responsible for implementing, if there are any, you know, it's important to speak with people that are responsible for implementing, you know, digital technologies for teaching, learning and assessment in your school as well. You know, it's important to have these conversations before anything is implemented. But I think, you know, one of the things that, you know, could be useful is using mobile technologies. So as you can see here, it's evident, you know, that purchasing a digital device for education can be extremely expensive for both teachers and for students. You know, we saw that from one of the questions that we were on before. And, you know, it's important, like I said, it's important to consider that there are applications on mobile phones as well. There could be for those, you know. So mobile phones have access to the internet, and, you know, many applications have apps made for mobile phones, such as Google Classroom, you know, Office 365, whether it's Microsoft Word or Microsoft PowerPoint or whatever, or Flipgrid, which is something that we'll be using as well. You know, obviously, you know, like I said, you know, it's important to have these conversations with your school management, or, you know, with whoever is responsible for implementing and maintaining, you know, digital technologies for teaching, learning, assessment. It's important to have these kind of conversations with them, because it is important that it's done safely and in an appropriate manner. You know, with anything, like I'm saying here, you know, with anything that's concerning the use of digital technologies in a school setting, it is important to consult school management and or the person or persons responsible for digital technologies in your school community. Okay, so there are 2 other videos. So there's one example there, which is using Office, you know, an Office mobile application, and there's also using Flipgrid on your phone. So I'm not going to go through those here now, because you will be able to, they're quite short videos, but you will be able to look at those in your own time. So we're going on to like I said before in the learning intentions at the beginning, we are going to be going on to the blended learning models. So, and we did mention them kind of in the Mentimeter / the chat earlier on. So in the chat, I want you to mention this now. What blended learning models were mentioned in webinar 1, can you remember? So if you can write it in the chat if you can remember any of them. So what blended learning models? So we have some answers coming in here, which is great. The flex model, fantastic. Station model, a la carte model. Okay, that's a great one. So the flipped model, station model, fantastic. Virtual model, okay. Flipped learning. Flex model, a la carte enriched, fantastic. Station model, station rotation, station flex, a la carte, okay. Okay, great. Okay, fantastic. There's some great answers coming in. Brilliant. Okay, fantastic. A la carte, lab rotation model, flex model. Okay, so we have some great answers coming in there. So these are just some of the examples. So we have the flipped classroom model, we have the rotation model, we have the enriched virtual model, and we have the flex model. So in relation to today, what we're going to be focusing on is we are going to be focusing on the rotation model, and we are going to be focusing on the enriched virtual model. So first, we're going to start off with the rotation model. Okay, from Graham in 2003. Okay, it involves 3 stations. So school teacher-led instruction. So, and then at home it would be direct instruction, and then at home then it would be the collaborative and independent activities. I said there it is ideal for eTwinning activities. Why do we think that? Can anyone hazard a guess? Or would anybody know why this kind of model would be ideal for eTwinning projects? So there's some great ones coming in here. Okay, so why do you think this rotation model would be ideal for when we're engaging in eTwinning projects? So if you can reply in the chat. So I think, you know, in relation to this, we have some fantastic answers coming in. So collaboration with students and in another country, good. I like the rotation model, it seems perfect. Yeah, so I mean, you know, it's great for asynchronous activities because the teacher's the leader, okay? So it's important, it's a good model for eTwinning projects because it engages the learner in activities, great. Teachers can put homework on the task in the eTwinning and students can collaborate, perfect. So it's led instruction, it allows for collaborative work, okay? Great, some great answers there. I mean, as you can tell, you know, with the online instruction, obviously it's through the use of the eTwinning platform. And to save, perfect answer there. To save time to ensure that students work at a pace, brilliant. And it gives the chance, exactly. So it gives students the opportunity to have different experiences, to occupy different roles, perfect. So, and I mean, again, it does, you know, it promotes collaboration. So, I mean, you know, with the online instruction, obviously, you know, the eTwinning platform would come to mind there, you know, and then when you're engaging in different activities, it could be the teacher-led instruction informing students about those activities, and then the collaborative activities, you know, whether it be working on a particular project or anything like that for eTwinning. You know, they can both, you know, students can take on different roles, and then once they're done, then they can be uploaded then to the platform. That's absolutely perfect. So we also have the enriched virtual model, okay? And before I go into this, what I want to do actually is I'm just going to put you onto the, I'm just going to share my screen there again, all right? So as we can see here, so I'm just going to share my screen there. So we have the, from the, we went through this before, you went through this before, Michael, and we have the blended learning supports from PDSC, which I think are absolutely fantastic. We have them for both primary and post-primary level. And what you can do is that if you access them, okay, we have the different models there, and these are some of the stuff we'll be doing. And we have all these different supports, etc., etc. Okay, so just make sure that you look at these blended learning supports for more information. Okay, so, you know, if we go here and we look at the enriched virtual model, you know, they have this information and these supports in relation to it. Okay, so just to make sure that you are aware of that again. All right, so I just wanted to quickly show you that before we continue on with the webinar presentation. Second there now. So if we see here, so for the enriched virtual model, all right, so with this model, you can ask questions, you can clarify deep understanding of material being explored in class and or at home, share and explain their thoughts, feelings. This is what students can do, share and explain their thoughts, feelings and opinions on a topic with peers. They can engage in problem solving activities based on content explored in school or accessed at home, and you can engage in independent research using online resources, which I think is absolutely fantastic. So the second task that I want you to do, okay, here is the following. So as you can see here in the chat, answer the following. So we went through a lot there, okay? So what I want you to do is I want you to choose a blended learning model that you've learned about in webinar 1 or in webinar 2, and think about how you would use it with eTwinning. So just, if you could answer that in the chat. So think about a model that you have learned about in Michael's webinar or in my webinar here, okay? If you can think about that and then put in the chat, how would you use that, or how would you incorporate that with eTwinning? I mean, we kind of went through some examples there. So if you can answer that in the chat, I'll give you a couple of minutes. So remember, just choose one of the blended learning models that you've learned about in webinar 1 or webinar 2, and think about how you'd use it in eTwinning. So if you can answer that in the chat. Perfect. We have some great answers coming in there. So, you can. Yeah, exactly. So we can use the rotation model. We're looking at the flex model either. And so they would explain then in relation to how you would use that. So we have the enriched virtual model. So how would you use it? Perfect answer here. So I often use the station model when creating collaborative projects in eTwinning projects. Great. So I would like to use the flipped classroom to lead students to make some research first and then share with the others what they have found. Fantastic. So lately I've used the rotation model. Perfect. And you've used Kahoot. Some fantastic answers here. So maybe I'll use the flipped, the flipped model for 1, for example, to ask students to think about what they have done. Perfect. I've used some great answers. So eTwinning gives us the opportunity to implement the flipped classroom perfectly. Okay. Maybe I'll ask them for what activities they should use it for. Okay. Some great answers here. Individual rotation models, since students' own pace is very important. For example, making group work projects and eTwinning projects. Okay. Organize a scavenger hunt in a flipped classroom. Okay, very interesting. The rotation model would be ideal for eTwinning projects. I think the teachers as administrators guide the students with their tasks. Students cooperate with other countries. Great, some fantastic answers there. Really, really fruitful conversation. Okay, so we're just going to move on there now. All right, so one of the things that I really want to look at is, planning for blended learning, as a whole school approach. One of the phrases I love using is, so we're all singing from the same hymn sheet. So we're all, so we're all singing from the same hymn sheet. So we're all, thinking the same and trying to implement the same ideas and processes as best we can. Okay, from a whole school approach. So when planning for blended learning, a whole school approach. So when planning for blended learning in school, it's important to embed digital technologies into teaching, learning, and student assessment as much as possible. It's important to be cognizant of how digital technologies are used in school. And, if anything is recorded, data will show if anything needs to be improved on. One of the tools, a tool that can help the school community, or your school community, or any school community, is the Selfie Tool. So Selfie stands for self-reflection on effective learning by fostering the use of innovative educational technologies. You know, it's a tool that was designed to help schools, and it continuously, you know, helps schools. And I mean, you know, it has just reached 1 million users, you know, which I think is absolutely fantastic. And I think, you know, in relation to Selfie, Selfie gathers anonymously the students' views, the teachers' views, and school leaders on how technology is used in their school. This is done using short statements and questions, a simple 1 to 5 agreement scale. The statements cover areas such as leadership, infrastructure, teacher training, and students' digital competencies. So I think this is very important, you know, in relation to when you're planning for that, you know, when you're planning for a blended learning approach. All right. So, you know, in relation to the Selfie Tool is available for primary, secondary, and vocational schools in Europe and beyond, and it can be used by any school. It's not just those with advanced levels of infrastructure, equipment, and technology use. And I think, you know, that's one of the things I love about it is, you know, it is cognizant of the digital divide. And I mean, you know, it is helping you, you know, in your school community to successfully plan for blended learning when you use, you know, Selfie. Right. So this is the registration process for Selfie. All right. So I'm just going to give you just a quick snapshot of that. Okay. And these are some of the examples of the questions that you have. Okay. So these are some of the ones there. All right. So I think, you know, some of the boxes are common for all schools, and, you know, in relation to Selfie, some of the questions are common for all schools and cannot be changed. These are in the light blue boxes. Others are optional, so you can decide to include them or not if they are relevant to your school. So, you know, I think the fact that you're able to adjust it, like I've said, you know, before, I think the fact that you're able to adjust it to suit your own scenario in your own school community, I think is absolutely fantastic. You know, please note that primary level has fewer and more simplified questions for the students. Some questions for vocational schools also have different wording to match their context and links with work and industry. So these are the these are some of the examples. Okay, almost all Selfie questions are answered on a 5-point scale. All right, so you can either strongly agree, disagree, slightly agree, or strongly agree. All right, so, you know, I think some of the advantages of using the Selfie tool, you know, with the Selfie tool, it involves the whole school community. You know, it can be customized to suit your needs. I think, you know, it encourages school communities to work together, and I think collaboration, you know, regardless of any scenario, I think is so very important. You know, it encourages school communities to work together and reflect on their embedding of digital technologies into teaching, learning, and student assessment. And I think the data from Selfie can be used to adjust any school's digital learning plan, you know, for blended learning or anything like that. You know, as a matter of interest, if you can reply in the chat, I mean, would you see, a simple yes or no would do. Could you see yourself possibly using Selfie? Or could you see the advantages? From what I've said there, could you see the advantages of using Selfie, you know, for any school community? So if you can reply in the chat. That's fantastic to hear, Arabella. Yeah, I think it's just I think it's a brilliant tool. Absolutely, yes, great. Yes, perfect, yes, great. You know, that's absolutely fantastic to hear that you're going to be using it in your school soon. Great. Great. This is brilliant. No, it's fantastic. Okay, so I think it's just, I mean, you know, the advantages for using Selfie, I think, you know, it is evident. All right. You know, it's just, I think it's absolutely fantastic. And, you know, the advantages are evident there. So just to conclude, I mean, just some of the key messages in relation to blended learning. I mean, it's nothing new, it's a renewed focus on this approach to teaching learning, and only to necessity. All right. So I think, in relation to this, I think a change in mindset is required, which leads into a change of practice. And I think, the fact that all of you are at this webinar here, I think is absolutely testament to that. Blended learning is an inclusive approach to teaching and learning. I think it suits a variety of learners. I mean, I've seen that, and I mean, I think so many of you have seen that as well. And I think one of the many advantages to blended learning is that it affords more time in class. It affords more time in class to explore topics, which I think is brilliant. Just to conclude, I think just to recap on the plethora of supports that are available to you, I think, the digital technologies team have a YouTube channel with the professional development services for teachers. They have a YouTube channel which they update regularly with tutorials, which I think is fantastic. And, they have, their distance learning resources as well, which is through the link there. And they also have their blended learning supports there, which is great. And also, if we see there, we have, some fantastic supports there from European SchoolNet. And it's important that you just familiarize yourself with them if you haven't already. Okay, so one of the final things to do with this activity is a reflective task. All right, so what you can do is that, we're going to be reflecting on the learning. All right, so if we click on the link there, you'll be able to follow the instructions. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to unshare my screen there. Just give me 1 second. So what I'll do is that I'll just instruct you on how to do this, and because I'm really cognizant of the fact that I want to leave time for questions as well. So what we'll do is that if you just click on the link here, which will bring you straight to Flipgrid. All right, this is also a video here in relation to how to use it. And what we really want to do, I think it's so important to reflect on your experiences. We'd like to record reflection and reflect on your learning journey with this webinar series. Okay, so I would like you to do that as your final reflective task. Okay, so I just really from the bottom of my heart, I really just want to thank you for coming to this webinar. I think, as educators, I think it's fantastic that, you're taking this time for professional development to learn. And, you're an absolute credit to your school communities. I can't thank you enough for this. So that's all I have to say for now. So we're right on schedule here with 10 minutes for questions. So if you have any questions, please let me know.
Thank you very much, Damien. Let's give some time to the participants to write their questions in the chat. I'm listening to my voice. Maybe you should mute while I'm speaking, because I think the participants hear it double as well. So some of the questions I've seen are relevant to the Selfie Tool, which is found very useful from the participants. And they're asking if it is available in different languages. As far as I know, it is. And also the question was mostly about the Turkish languages, but I know that it's available in different languages as well. We don't hear you, Damien.
Sorry about that. So what I will do is that I will put up the Selfie Tool, the Selfie website, and on the website it will let them know the languages that it's available in.
Excellent, thank you. So maybe as we are closing this webinar series, I would like to ask you what's the most important thing to keep in mind when discussing about blended learning, or when we start having an interest on adapting this approach and implementing this approach in our classroom? What would be your a good summary, let's say, to be kept in mind when we start discussing about blended learning?
I think it's very important, to work with your school community, and I think it's important to have these kind of conversations, because in terms of digital literacies and things like that, I think that it's so varied. So I think it's important to have a conversation as a school community, and decide, well, what approach will we use moving forward. And I think it's important not to be afraid to try, because the data, you'll be able to collect data from it, and I think that there's so many supports out there for you, and I think it's important not to be afraid to try and see which one works for you in your school community. And another thing I would say is that not to compare yourself to any other school community. If some other school community is doing something, that's all well and good. You focus on yours, because you're helping your school community get better at using blended learning, or get better at using digital technologies. So that would be my advice. And use, like I said, don't compare yourself to anyone else, and use the supports there, and not to be afraid. Don't be afraid to try.
Thank you, Damien. Yeah, indeed, that's a very good message, and I would say also to consider your own students, consider your own environment, and as we said on Monday as well, create your own blend, because you cannot really, there is no real recipe to follow, but you have to adjust practices in your case.
Absolutely, I think it's so important to be aware of that, and like I said, no two school communities are the same. So just because something works in another school community, it doesn't give you, by all means try it. But I mean, if something doesn't go your way or the way you intended to, that's okay, because, like we said, no school communities are the same. So that's why I was saying, don't be afraid to try, and don't be afraid to, use the supports that are there for you.
All right. So we have some questions about the activity that you shared, Damien. Could you please explain more about it? Maybe how the participants could join them, where they can find them, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that I said to do is Flipgrid. So Flipgrid, in Flipgrid, you can record your responses. So what I'm going to do is that I'm just going to sign in there now. So, it'll give you instructions in relation to what to do. So I'm just going to try and share my screen there now for you. But once you click onto the once you click into the link, what will happen is that it'll give you instructions on it. So like if we have here now, so I'm just going to share my screen there, just bear with me. So I have my screen is being shared there. So as we can see here, so I have a link, so I'll share the link again. So once you get onto the link, you'll see that it is the reflecting on our learning experience. Okay, so what will happen is that, like I've said here, it is always important to reflect on your learning experiences. We will be reflecting based on the Borton model of reflection. In your video, share your what, so what, and now what. So it goes into more detail here. Okay, so what you can do is that this is what I mean. So the what will be pick 4 understandings from webinar 1 and webinar 2. So 4 examples of what I've learned. So the so what is going to be based on 4 examples of how they'll impact your school community if you use them. And then the now what which is based on your examples you mentioned. If you decide to do so, what will you do to implement the examples you have mentioned? Okay, so what will happen is we have two great responses there. Okay, so you can click on the link and it should bring you here. Okay, so what I'll do is that I'll just share the link in the chat again. Sorry, I'll just make the announcement there. So I have the link there. So I've just shared it there. All right. So what you can do is that you simply, so if I view it as a student here, so you would join. All right. So you would join there. So your login is successful. So you would join there, okay? And once you click on the link, you will see this, okay? And then what you can do then is that you follow these instructions here, okay? You just have to click on record a response and then you record your response. Is that okay?
Yes, I think it was very well explained, Damien. Many thanks. Perfect. So before we leave, I would like to remind you that in order to receive the certificate that we provide in this webinar series, you will need to join the two webinars as you did, or watch the recordings that we share afterwards in the platform. Join the asynchronous activities that the two speakers prepared for you, and fill in the feedback survey that you will find in the Learning Lab as well. So please make sure to complete these activities successfully if you want to receive the certificate. I don't see any other questions in the chat, Damien, so I think we are excellent on time. Thank you very much for this webinar. I think it was very inspiring and useful for the participants.
Yeah, absolutely.
So thank you all also for joining. Thank you for spending this 1 hour with us. We hope to see you again in another live event. Please continue working online with us in the platform.